Welcome to Surviving Roots, the podcast where we navigate the messy, beautiful work of healing and growth. I'm your host, Cari, and this is your space to breathe, reflect, and find strength. Whether you're breaking free from old patterns, healing from loss, or rebuilding your story one small step at a time, you're in the right place. So take a deep breath, give yourself this time, and let's uncover the tools to move forward with courage. This podcast is for you. Today, I'm sitting down with the incredible Cari, author, mindfulness expert, and host of the hit podcast, New Mindset, Who Dis. Case has built a massive platform helping millions feel seen and heard through his short affirmations and mantras, making mindfulness simple and accessible. He's been featured on The Today Show, Good Morning America, Forbes, and more. And his twice-weekly podcast offers real, no-fluff takes on self-improvement, mindset, and living your best life. No gurus, no preaching, just practical insights. In his book, That's Bold of You, it's all about reclaiming your realest, weirdest, and most vibrant self. Today, we're diving into his creative process, his daily routines, and the mindset shifts that can help you show up more fully in your own life. Hi, Cari.
Hello.
So before we dive in, I just have to ask, do people call you Case? Because your name, Cari, has like this rhyme to it, and I just can't imagine not saying Kenny. So pretty much through our whole talk, I think I'm gonna have to use your first and last name together.
That's fine. It flows. It was actually Casey, but I did a big rebrand in like second or third grade. I remember it specifically. I don't remember the year, but I remember it specifically where I was like, I'm dropping the Y.
Really?
And then that's that simple. My mom will call me Casey sometimes, but that's the only person.
Okay, yeah, Cari. You know, my maiden name is Cam, so it used to be Cari Cam, and I don't know what it is, like Cari. So I tried talking to myself, like before our interview, like some questions I was going over, and I was like, I just can't call you Case. For some reason, it's like Case.
It is confusing. A lot of people are like Chase, and I don't really like Chase. No offense to Chases, but I've never had a good experience with people named Chase for some reason. So yeah, I don't know. We'll go with Case.
We'll go with Case.
Or Case Kenny, whatever you prefer.
I'm gonna have to do Case Kenny. So I actually want to share a story of how I met you, because for me it was a bit serendipitous. We both live in Miami, which I did not know that at the time. And I'm a member of a club here, and I was going there to work on my book proposal, leaving my kids with their dad, my husband, and the mom guilt was kicking in, and I almost didn't go, but something in my gut was telling me just to go that day, to make my writing, to make myself a priority. And, you know, one thing I'm learning with my own healing and mothering journey is that you can make yourself a priority in your life and your dreams, and it doesn't take away from the love that you have for your family or for other people. So I walk into the club, and the woman standing there is like, oh, are you here for the Cari event that's starting in an hour? And I was like, what better way to kick off a day of writing to have your mindset checked by Cari himself? So I walk into this event, and everyone got these journals, which I still have. And something you said to me that day, or said to everyone attending, you said for us to name a negative and who do you not want to be in your life? And I sat there before writing in the journal that you gave us this prompt. And then you said, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. And my enemy was someone that, never took responsibility, always lived in fear, never did anything to grow. So you really stirred up my emotions that day, and I asked myself, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up in the world? And I went home, I sent out my proposal, and within a week I got an agent. So I want to thank you for that afternoon, because you really shifted me within my book journey, and I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today.
I'm grateful to be here, and sometimes it's just like a little push from some random person and what they said, and it's the right timing. Clearly it was the right timing, and it was just like a small catalyst. It's beautiful. I see that so often. That's like the majority of the theme with my work is like my message, as simple as it might be, it's the weirdest thing. It always finds people at the exact right time. And I don't know if that's a reflection of just humanity about how we're all going through these things or wrestling with these things or have common goals and don't realize it, or if it's something cosmic or serendipity or universal. I don't know, but I hear things like that so often, and it makes the work that much more meaningful.
Yeah, I just think it goes to show you're living your purpose, and I think your messages just find their way out into the world to it's just, I think there is something serendipitous about it. I think that's why you're so relatable, and people just we're going to get into those iconic mantras, affirmation, and quotes of yours, because I mean, they are, I'm not sure if I can find one person on earth that's not liking, sharing, commenting, or using them to better themselves, you know?
Yeah.
So was there a specific moment in your life where you woke up and said, this is my purpose, this is my mission, like this is what I want to do?
I mean, I would say recently, yes, I'm stepping into that. I mean, I started the podcast, which started all of this almost 7 years ago. And that was in response to just feeling like I didn't know myself, feeling like I was rushing, feeling like I, in one context, was one person, another context was another person, not liking that fact and wanting to force myself to have a point of view, a sense of truth that I actually lived by. So I started the podcast kind of, call it a quarter life crisis when I was 29-ish, wanting to have a direction that I created for myself, not just borrowing from other people. So I would do the podcast where I would sit down without guests and I would just force myself to have perspective. This is what I believe and this is why I believe it. Put language behind it, put proof behind it, put experience behind it. And I think, what I realized through doing that, which was literally just self-inquiry on a mic, that is mindfulness. And then I think the puzzle pieces kind of started coming together because I've always had a draw to language in particular. Like I took 5 years of Latin in high school. I don't even know if they still offer Latin, if that's even a thing that people study nowadays.
I don't know if they do.
So I loved it. And I was really good at it. I took the AP and got 5s on the AP. I majored in Chinese and Arabic in college. I took Hindi and Urdu as well. I know I'm a tall, pale dude from Chicago. It doesn't really compute, but I was always really good at languages and crap at everything else. Like I started pre-med, horrible. I did accounting for a little bit, horrible. My brother went to Harvard as a cardiologist. My mom was a lawyer, so very brainy side of the family. I got more of the creative side. Always clicked with language. And then pause. Then I took 12 years and worked a career while trying to figure out myself in advertising and sales. And then starting the podcast and kind of stepping into the space of introspection and then language. Now it's starting to click looking back of my draw to language and the way that the language has surface and meaning and energy, and the simple choice of language can dictate your relationship with your feelings, with people, with the world around you. Now it makes a lot of sense for me, and now I very much would say like I'm stepping into the thing that I'm meant to do, whether that's speaking or writing or creating or whatever it may be. Just the combination of sharing my feelings, which is what I say I do for a living, plus language, plus creativity. Like I grew up going to Waldorf school, like very creative upbringing. Now it all makes sense, and like now I'm like very secure in that, whereas when I was working the job and doing the podcast at the same time, and even after leaving that, I left that in 2021, at the end of 21. Even then I was like, what am I doing? How do I make a living? What does this look like? Like, I'm not a psychologist. I'm also not an influencer. What does this look like now? I find a lot more stability there, and just stepping into that and like doing what I'm drawn to feels really good.
Wow. And this was just a couple of years ago? Like 2021?
That was when I left. Yeah, so I was doing it on the side for about 3 years.
Okay.
And then full-time 21.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't really imagine you doing anything else. You've really paved yourself a way through your life just in a short amount of years.
I was good at sales. I liked sales.
Yeah.
I miss it a little bit just from the camaraderie and people. Like working for yourself as a creative can be a little alienating at times. I started as an account executive, worked my way up to a regional vice president. I had a whole team. We were corporate people. We'd go out and close deals and entertain people.
Yeah.
Like we had to take clients out twice a week and do this whole thing. And I always joke that I think people should wait tables and do sales at some point in their life. That the combination of those two things will teach you everything you need to know about yourself.
Yeah.
And I give a lot of my current, confidence, poise, whatever you want to call it, to that sales career.
Okay.
Of my ability to, I was pretty introspective, introverted, shy, to grow into like more confident, like really enjoyed that experience. But now that I contrast what I do with what I used to do and like who I was and who I am, it's very clear that I'm doing the right thing on the right track.
And what does your family say?
They love it. They don't get it. I mean,
Did you go home and say, I'm a mindfulness expert and I'm going to write a book and I have a podcast? My
parents are super supportive. Like clearly they supported me going to Notre Dame, my brother going to Harvard. Like this was not a cheap upbringing, and to encourage me to major in Mandarin Chinese for tens of thousands of dollars a year at a top private university. So I owe them a lot, and that's such a privilege. But I mean, they're both 77. Like, they don't really understand how I could possibly make a living. But they're very supportive, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, that's all that matters.
And my mom's a voracious reader and writer as well, so like she appreciates that.
Yeah.
And everything else is just like, wow, that's great. So,
that's amazing.
yeah.
But that is amazing. So your affirmation and quotes, I mean, they're pretty iconic. Can you walk us through your creative process? Like, why the red pen and why handwritten?
So why handwritten? I mean, for one, I mean, when I first started handwriting, when I first started writing quotes, it came from, I would do these podcasts and I would want to promote the podcast, and I would also want to show myself that I had understanding of the topic, right? You could yap for 20 minutes. Can you distill that into 12 words potentially? Yeah. Difficult challenge, definitely a sign of mastery or understanding. So I wanted to do that. But there's, inspirational quotes have been around since the start of the internet, which is fantastic. I just felt a little distaste for like, oh, let's hop into Illustrator or Canva and do a one by one. And so it felt so disconnected from the reality and the emotion of the quote. So I was like, let me just do something creatively different. Let me handwrite. This was in 2020, before a lot of people were doing it. I'm sure there were other people, but at the time it wasn't as popular. And then red was just to be different. Yeah. And also a little bit, everyone was always like, red is an angry, mean color. I'm like, who made this up? Is this like trauma from childhood when people were grading our tests and stuff that red meant wrong? Like, I like Chinese, red is the national color. Yeah. It's a very uplifting color. So for me, I was like, I'm just going to do red on white because, for one, it pops, draws the eye. Two, it's a reflection of energy. I think a lot of people don't get drawn to self-development or feeling, sharing, introspection, whatever it is, because sometimes it's like, oh, that's for sad people. Like, journaling is for sad people. This is for sad people. I'm like, no. And that's why like a lot of my quotes are like a little cheeky and funny and weird, and they have that contrast, because it's like, my mission is to celebrate sharing your feelings, not just to sit in a sad space when you need to. Like, there can be a beautiful contrast. So that was the idea. And then, writing them is, I've written so many. It's, speaking as a writer and a creative, it's a very iterative process where I'm not just sitting down and I'm like, let's write some quotes and then I just write. It's always like I'm writing in response to something I wrote a while ago, or I'm writing in response to what someone else wrote. Like, a lot of my best writing comes from someone wrote, you deserve someone who, and then they'll give their definition of that. I'm like, well, that's cool, but let me think of what I deserve someone who. So I'll take that first 3 words and then I'll go to town on you deserve someone who, and then I'll just write as many quotes as I can think about to bring to life what I think compatibility, connection, whatever maybe looks like. So a lot of it's that. I mean, I've got a document. It's literally 600 pages of quotes and ideas and things. Yeah. And now that I've written enough, I kind of understand what do people need, what do people want, what makes people happy, what makes people feel seen. So really stepping into that. And usually it takes me about 2 days to write each set. I like to start it, sleep on it, and come back to it. Yeah. And that process usually makes sure that it's raw. It's not patronizing. That's kind of my enemy when it comes to writing. Yeah. It's a fine line between just writing something because people want to hear it versus writing it in a way that is authentic and genuine. And that's why I like to write, take a step back, come back to it. Yeah. And I tell you all, my process is very specific. Like, I've gotten, like, I need to write between like 10 a.m. and 1 p.m. Okay. Like, between coffee 1 and coffee 2. Okay. And listening to house music. Like, that's how it has to happen. Wow. That's the only way it works. So yeah.
And do you ever fear running out of words?
No.
How many quotes do you actually think you've written?
I don't know. I mean, how many posts have I done? I think I've done 1,000 posts. Each post is like 6 or 7. Wow. And but then so like then you take the podcast. The podcast is, I've done 700 episodes. Every episode is a long outline, if not sentence by sentence sometimes, because the language is so important. I've done 700 of those. Those are each about 2,000 words. So yeah, we're getting up there for sure as far as like output.
I think what you're doing is so important. And you just brought up something like how some people can say, oh, well, that's for sad people. For someone who has young kids, like, to experience the rainbow of emotions, I think, is so important. I think some of us are so programmed to think like, oh, well, that's for sad people, that's for depressed people, that's for lost people. But, as a mom, I am teaching my kids at such a young age the importance of mindset and the importance of all these like inner tools and helping them like make them stronger and activate them so they can go out into the world and not, whether they become sad or lost, they know that they have what it takes in them to get through anything. And I think it's so interesting how people, especially this day and age, are still sort of stuck in this like, not caveman mentality, but like, if you don't act this way or if you don't think this way, then you're weak. Or like, what's wrong with weakness? What's wrong with softness? What's wrong with being vulnerable? Like,
I think so much of that comes down to the literal words we use. Yeah. And I know I'm steering the conversation to things that I'm passionate about, but like even this morning, there was this, I think it was a new study, at least I didn't check the date on it, but I think it was in Psych Today or something. And it was talking about the power of word choice when it came to describing alone time. And they ran all these university students through just this like social psychology research where they had some students, they said, hey, you're going to go log some alone time, some isolation time, some time by yourself, or some me time. And they had each of them go and be alone for like an hour or whatever it is. And then afterwards, they would come back and they would ask each one of them certain questions to kind of gauge their emotional response to that time alone. And depending on how they described the purpose of the time, isolation, being alone, alone time versus the final one of me time, all of the former outside of me time were negative. They felt very negative about themselves afterwards. But the people who were told to go log some me time, it was very positive. It was a positive switch as opposed to a negative switch. So just the difference between saying I'm going to spend some time alone versus I'm going to have some me time. Yeah. I know me time's a little bit cheesy, like some me time, but like just literally just the way that you described that time totally shifted people's mindsets. And I think that's such a powerful thing.
That is
just
such a
literally
thing.
just the word choice. And obviously there's nuance to it. And, if you're hurt or having trauma, you can't just be like, oh, happiness, like it doesn't work like that. But in everyday context, from like journaling, from being a mindset training thing versus a diary for sad people, like just little shifts like that, I think can get you out of the cave and into the sun. Yeah. And it's an amazing thing.
Oh, it's an amazing thing. I think me time is so important. I wake up at 4:30, 5 a.m. every morning just to have 2 hours of me time before my kids. Well, I go to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Also,
when my kids go to sleep, I go to sleep. And then I wake up at 4:30 or 5 just to have that me time. I make a coffee, I journal a bit, I, do my to-do list and think about what I want to do for the day and how I want to feel. So I think me time is the perfect way of just setting yourself up for success each day or in the evenings. Yeah.
And even that's active me time. I think a lot of people are lonely in life and don't choose their me time. It's kind of thrust upon them. Yeah. And, I'm not encouraging people to just kind of throw the negative emptiness feeling that you might have from that under the rug. But I think there's something powerful about contextualizing these things in more uplifting ways. It's the same one that I always come back to when I do these exercises about language and emotion. The one that is so clear to me when I do these speaking engagements in front of 100, 200, 300 people is I feel a certain way, but my reality is different. I feel nervous. I always get nervous in front of 200 people staring at me, even though I've done dozens of them. I feel nervous, but the reality of the emotion that is more true and one that allows for me to be more optimistic is I feel nervous, but I am excited. And just the shift in that type of language is very uplifting to me. You can feel the negative emotion, which is real. We're not trying to control the emotion. Yeah, I feel nervous. This is a normal thing, but I am excited. And just that shift in energy for myself of honoring a feeling, but allowing myself to step into a more positive one by contextualizing the experience based on language that speaks to, how I feel, but also how I want to feel, and that evolution. That type of exercise, I think, is everything.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And that's something that, these are things, everything that you're saying, these are you don't have to reinvent yourself. These are things you can start doing right now.
Yeah.
Everyone that's listening, you can actually start incorporating these little shifts right now.
Yeah.
So what is, mindset? When people are what is mindset? Or I'm working on my mindset, or I have a terrible mindset, or I have a positive mindset. What is the Case Kenny's definition of mindset?
Ooh, I don't think I've ever been asked that. Well, I mean, I think some of the cliches I would throw out, it's about how you see yourself, it's about how you see the world, it's about how you see your relationship with all these things. I think recently I'm really stepping into the idea of like understanding that we are complex and there's many parts to us. As much as we like to just see, oh, we're just a sack of meat and we're just one thing, I think it's much more nuanced than that, and I think there's a lot of power in that. There's something called IFS, Internal Family Systems. I had Gabby Bernstein on my podcast, and she wrote a whole book about internal family systems.
Yeah, I'm learning all about
great.
this. Yeah.
Basically, a therapeutic approach to oneself and understanding that there's many different parts of yourself. Some of them are based on past trauma. Some of them are based on protecting yourself, keeping yourself safe, numbing yourself, and then there's self. And self is like the divine self, like the true, compassionate, wise, holistic you. And it's our job to break through those parts to find that self. And I think mindset is understanding that when you feel a certain way, it's identifying that a part of me feels this way, not I am this way. And that's obviously a very simple thing to say, but it's like a part of me feels nervous, but, and then fill in the blank based on, something honest and truthful. But just the language of like a part of me feels nervous, a part of me feels abandoned, a part of me feels angry, I think can be life-changing. And I think building mindsets around the recognition, the awareness of the complexity of yourself, plus an evolution forward. When I talk about mindfulness, I always say mindfulness is the one and only conduit to optimism. Optimism being the simple belief that things can change. Like, I'm not a butterflies and rainbows guy and say everything will be fine. I don't know if everything will be fine. That feels pretty shitty of me to say that to someone not knowing that. So I say optimism is the belief that things can change. And I think that is optimism, because so often when we're stuck in anxious thoughts or overthinking or depression, it's this is my final reality. Not just the parts of me are experiencing this reality, but the whole of me experiences reality. So how do we break free of this identifying the parts in the whole, the forest and the trees, and move away from static finality? It's with language and it's with optimism. And the only way to make something real in your life, to say that things can change, is with the language you choose. So if anything, to steer it back again to language, I would say mindset is about the way that you talk to yourself. Okay. Simply put.
Okay, that's amazing. So you're focusing on language a lot. Like, if you had an individual that is really feeling like maybe they're in a powerless mindset and they want to have more of a greatness mindset, what is the little seed that you would plant in their mind to help their mindset grow? Would it be?
I think it would be giving context to where they feel. So if they're feeling stuck, if they're feeling limiting mindsets of some kind, they have prescribed finality to their current feeling. A part of me feels this way, therefore the whole of me feels this way, and I will always feel this way. Okay. Let's put that down on paper for one, to see that. And I've done this with people before, and just the act of writing that down is like, well, that's ridiculous. Of course not. Just literally the act of writing that down and being like, I will always be alone. Like, just writing it down and like sometimes seeing the absurdity of the way that we apply this permanence to things that clearly aren't permanent. So that I would do that for one. And then two, like, I just like, how do we prescribe movement? Like, mindfulness to me is a movement. It's emotional movement. It's a movement towards optimism. Things can change. How do we actually do that? Well, you show yourself a beginning, middle, and future direction, and you say like, I am transitioning past and I am moving toward. Like, this is one of my favorite journaling exercises. So like, the way that you currently feel is the thing that you think will be permanent for you. Let's at least put on paper that we're evolving past that feeling. Let's just put it on paper. Now let's describe what we're moving toward. If we can put language behind what we're moving toward, then we've put space between ourselves and that current feeling. And even if it's just like the creative act, and there is some science and biology and neuroscience behind mind and body connection, at least now we've put some constraints behind this thing that before was just this blob of permanence. And now we can say, I am evolving past feeling unlovable, and I am moving toward a reality where described. And at least we're just putting that out there so we can show ourselves that things can change. What does the change look like? Not necessarily an outcome, more so of a direction, but just to get the juices flowing. I like to start there. And then again, we break it down even more. It's like, a part of me feels this way, but I am, and we're sitting in the choice of language that perhaps we've blindly bought into, or we're using words that have one meaning but don't necessarily describe our reality, and we're just chiseling away at this through language. That's my preferred approach. Of course, within that, there's probably many things that you're going to hit a roadblock and you're going to be like, why, where is this coming from? That's where you go to therapists. You don't talk to me. We're doing arts and crafts here at the end of the day. But like just that process, I found a lot of people, it really helps you break through because we're so focused on language that we're comfortable with. And now in the day and age of social media, we do a lot of borrowing of language. That's great. Like we're in this renaissance where people know therapy language and people are doing cold plunges and red light and journaling and affirmations. And it's great. I would never bemoan that. But we're also prescribing things that aren't necessarily true to ourselves. We're labeling ourselves very quick in certain ways, and we're using words like trauma, which we should withhold for actually traumatic experiences, and not just for the right or wrongness of the label, but boxing ourselves into labels and experiences that don't necessarily need to have as much weight as the internet has made us think. So lots there, but I really do think it comes back to language and phrases and words.
Well, I want to say two things. One, that's super powerful because I think that once you get your feelings out, whether you say it out loud or you put it down on paper, I think the weight of them even start to lighten because you've said something out loud, you've put it down on paper, and it doesn't look as terrifying when you're looking at it. Almost like you've removed it from yourself and you're looking at it. And I feel like you can see that you are more powerful than, those feelings. So I 100% agree with that. Yeah. And I wasn't even going to go there, but I think you are so spot on when it comes to, I was in Starbucks the other day and I literally heard like a 9-year-old say to her mom, I'm just having so much anxiety right now. Like this is so much anxiety. I'm so anxious. And I thought to myself, that's just nerves, kid.
That's a Tuesday. What are you talking about?
Tuesday. Like, how are you prescribing yourself and diagnosing yourself with anxiety? And not to take away from that, but everyone is so trigger happy to label themselves as, trauma or anxiety or depressed. Like, I know. People are like, I'm like, that's just, you're having a moment, you're having a rough day. Now, not to say that there are not people suffering from depression, but I don't know how we've become so terrified of like feelings if they're not happiness.
It's such a great thing to comment on because like we can never judge someone because we don't know their relationship 100%. With the emotion, and maybe it really is that heavy for them, of course. I think at the end of the day, though, it's ours and theirs and the internet's collective relationship to the emotion. It all comes back to me to two words, and I have this conversation a lot with friends of mine, guy friends who are still single. It's the difference between so and but. Like, I am a certain way, I feel a certain way, so I am a certain way. I am a certain way, I feel a certain way, but I'm willing to push past that. And particularly in a relationship of context, I have a friend of mine who's a great guy, but he's always been, grass is greener, I can't commit. And he's always used language like, I always ruin this, and I'm feeling that it's about to happen with my girlfriend, so I'm thinking about ending it. Versus, I've always done this in the past, I feel this coming up again with her, but I care so much about her, I'm going to sit in this space and I'm going to do something about the emotion, right? Big difference there. One is huge. Accepting the passiveness in relation to the emotion. The other one is saying there's something meaningful on the other side of challenging it. And it's the same way when it comes to like even like anxiety. You hear a 9-year-old talk about having anxiety. It's the difference between like, hey, I'm having an anxious thought today, so I'm an anxious person. Hey, I'm having an anxious thought today, but this is a Tuesday. It's part of life. I'm gonna get stronger. I'm gonna get better. Big difference there. The internet can prescribe weight to it, or it can provide clarity and evolution to it. It all depends on who we listen to, and it makes me sad when I hear people, again, permanence and heaviness of emotions based upon how we think we're supposed to perceive them. I'm a little bit neurotic. Ask my girlfriend, but I would never say I'm a neurotic person or anxious person. Never. I would be doing myself such a crazy disservice to say that. Yeah. And I'm not running from the emotions. It's not like I have an unhealthy relationship to negative emotions, but I refuse to create and craft identities around these things that I can prescribe lightness or heaviness to it based upon my relationship with them, based upon so versus but, again, language. But yeah, you're
I
so
think
right.
that's so powerful what you're saying. And like everyone listening, even if it's not even from yourself, but just even as parents, like I used to label myself so much as a helicopter mom, and that I must, I live in fight or flight. I'm a helicopter. I'm paranoid. And then I just started dissolving all that stuff and realizing that I'm not a helicopter mom. When we are in scenarios where I need to be a little bit more protective than my kids, I'm a good mom. That's like, what? You know what I mean? Like I started putting all these labels on all myself, and you really do. You do yourself a disservice. You really do.
Even the other day, I had a fellow named Peter Crone on my podcast. He's a great guy. I mean, you talk about like the things that I do. He's been doing it for longer, and he's just like so eloquent. And like I look up to him because he's got such a great way of speaking, and I want to be more clever at speaking. But I was having a conversation with him, and I was like blah 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 blah, and I'm such a type A person, blah 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 blah, and he like humbled me real quick. He was like, why are you calling yourself a type A person? And it's like, were you born a type A person? Are you literally, your identity is a type A person? Or do you think you need to be a type A person to obtain the reality that you think is eluding you? And like, I'm humbled all the time by my own work and by other people. I was like, damn, wait a minute. I was like, yeah, you're probably right about that. I've been walking around saying I'm a type A person, and that all these things flow from being a type A person, whereas it's likely the other way around. Like I'm crafting my reality based on assuming that I'm a type A person, not in response to my reality. And it's labels. It's labels. Like I wrote a book called That's Bold of You because of, I think it's a bold thing to challenge labels. If you've been called too loud, too quiet, too this, too that, the way that we so quickly will then call ourselves that. And that's why I think it's the craziest thing. Respect to everyone, particularly within dating. I think I'm on the toxic side of TikTok lately, where it's just like horrible dating story after dating story. But I watch them, so the algo's feeding it. And it's a lot of people, like they'll describe legitimately horrible dating experiences. And I've got so much empathy for people who go through these. But they'll be like, yeah, I had this horrible ex-boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll yap for a little bit. And then the conclusion is all men or all women are this way. And I'm like, I understand. As a survival instinct, we use evidence to prescribe future prediction, and we do it at scale. A couple bad experiences means that the majority of the rest likely will be. But I think it's such an absurd thing, particularly within dating. Let's say you're in your early 20s and you've had 10 significant dating things, whether that's dating for a couple weeks or a couple years or whatever. You're going to prescribe the rest of mankind or womankind based on 10 people. I just think that's insane. But it's like how our logic works. If one person who you had a close, I mean, there's a lot here, of course, like childhood, like the way that, so much. Right. But anyway, the idea of a small scale of people treating you one way, calling you one thing, to prescribe that to everyone and to ourselves, to me, it seems a little unfair.
I think it's not only unfair, but honestly, I think it's a way of like not having to do some work, meaning like it's easier just to label everyone, that meaning it's them, it's not me, and not to say that it's the person to begin with if they're in a toxic or bad relationship, but like take the time to sit with it and be like, you know what did I learn by being in that terrible relationship? Maybe it's the things that I won't stand for the next time, the things that are important to me, the things that I want to attract. Maybe there's some self-reflection or something there, but I think it's just an easy cop-out to be like, all men suck. And then I just feel like you're going to keep attracting sucky men I mean, until you learn the lesson.
Such a true statement. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like, I'm not a big like manifester. I still don't really know what that means, to be honest. Well, I have my own definition, but in the classical sense of like visualizing and then reality knocking on your door, I'm a little skeptical. But my idea of manifesting, like whatever your belief in manifesting is, whether it's putting in the work to get the result, whether it's visualizing and creating the reality in your head and then naturally creating that based on your life, whatever it is, I think it's impossible to have made up one reality in your head and then to step into the world and accept that to be the reality. Namely, if you say everyone will hurt me, all men are dishonest, all women are crazy, and that's what you're saying. You're saying that. You're creating TikToks about it and you're saying it. But then for you to say, also pause, I want to be loved by a man who's honest and a woman who's not crazy, right? We're just going hyperbole here. Those two things can't be true at the same time. How can we justify logically those things to be true at the same time? We've got to fix our expectations of people first in order to step into the reality second. Because everything from there that other people you might believe in about, you're going to manifest and you're going to continue to attract, very much believe in that based on what you just prescribed in your head. You're saying all men, all women, all realities will be this way. I don't think we can honestly expect it to be different. So we have to start there, which goes back to your idea of mindset.
Yeah.
How do we relate to experiences in life and to ourselves and possibility and optimism?
Yeah.
It starts there, certainly.
I love that. I want to talk to you about, like, I don't know when it was, but I saw this video that you posted, maybe it was even like a year ago, and you had found a quote that you found inspiring on Reddit. And it was something about how a head full of memories versus a head full of regrets. Do you remember this?
Of course. I talk about it all the time. It's like my crutch when I don't know what to say. I just reference that quote because I think it's so powerful.
I mean, it is so powerful, and I had never heard of this before. And then when you shared it and you were speaking about it, when I started my whole journey a couple years ago, really starting it, I had no idea that there was even the idea that you could forgive yourself, or that you needed to have, like, self-forgiveness plays a role in all of this. I thought you were always having to, work with, like, forgiving others who have hurt you or forgiving certain situations, but not forgiving yourself. I didn't even understand that concept. So when you shared this, and the difference was, if you can explain and expand on that whole quote that you read on Reddit, the whole difference about, like, forgiving yourself for past mistakes is the difference between those two things.
Yeah. So, I mean, the internet's undefeated again. Anytime anyone ever asks me, like, who I look up to or mentors, I always say the internet and Reddit, because seriously, that's where you get real, raw wisdom. Yeah. Wisdom, especially Reddit. It's just normal people. And the quote was, the difference between a head full of memories and a head full of regret is your ability to forgive yourself. Well, truly, though.
It is true.
What makes a regret and a memory a memory? Again, it's how we describe it. And there are very valid regrets in life. But the idea of forgiveness, and we're talking about self-forgiveness here, it's one of those ones that I think we prescribe so much heaviness to it and complexity to it that I think is unfair. I don't know what true self-forgiveness looks like. I don't think you know that until you actually truly forgive yourself. And I think that could take years. It's one of the you can only connect the dots looking back thing. Yeah. So I don't know about that. And I think it could take a lot of deep work, shadow work, therapy, or whatever you want to call it, to truly say, I forgive myself energetically and soulfully. Yeah. Until I get to that point, I know that a requirement of that work will be trusting yourself again. So when I think about forgiving yourself, I think step one will always be trusting yourself again. Because the reality of the mistake you made, the thing that you say is a regret, is at that time when you did that thing and you stayed with that partner, or you accepted a certain behavior, or you moved cities and quit jobs and whatever, at that moment you were trusting yourself. You were saying, this is good enough for me, this is what I want, I accept this. And then obviously through hindsight you realize it's not the case. But when you made that decision, you were trusting yourself. And then it fell flat in your face and you feel really bad about it and you're struggling to forgive yourself. So how do we get back energetically to that point before you did it? We have to learn to trust ourselves again. And I think, again, mindset-wise, without that, we start doing what we just talked about. All men are this way. I don't deserve this. This is my final reality, permanence. So I just like a very practical thing, not to get to the depth of self-forgiveness, but it starts with, I trust myself. So one of the common exercises I do with people is, I trust myself too. And then I have people write whatever down. What do you actually trust yourself to do right now? Put it on paper. And some of it is just belief, but then you actually take it out into life and you live it. So I think, you have to consider your past mistakes as moments when you trusted yourself. And we have to find the willingness to trust ourselves again to potentially make new mistakes or to make rewarding ones. But without that trust in yourself, you're not going to be able to do it.
Is there something you would be willing to share, that a big mistake that you've had to learn to forgive yourself?
Sure, some relationship ones for sure. I used to be a classic, just like let a relationship die because I didn't have the cojones to end it, or, was afraid of being alone but didn't want a relationship. Classic avoidant, fearful mentality. And then there's some of like the more like work related ones. Like I wish I would have stepped into doing this full time more energetically earlier and really owned it. I remember when I was kind of first doing it, and even a couple of years in, and I was working that job, people would ask me like, "Oh, you're writing quotes? Like, what's going on, Case?" And I would downplay it. I'd be like, "Oh, I'm just joking around, man. It's nothing serious." And I'm like, what a disservice to myself to like lie to myself. So I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I would have trusted myself to have been like, I can be a regional vice president of sales and also someone who cares tremendously about himself and people and mindsets. I'd say those are two certainly, and I think I've corrected those. I think with my girlfriend, I prioritize clarity and reassurance for myself and her above everything else. I don't think there's any ever doubts there. And then for myself, like trusting myself again, I even put a label on it once I quit, and I was like, no, I'm doing this. I say, I am Case Kenny. I share my feelings for a living. Like I jokingly made that my label. So I think I certainly did exactly what, I'm preaching here. Even to the point of like hyperbole of being like, every day telling my girlfriend like what I love about her in a cheesy way, or being someone who saying I share my feelings for a living. You might not have to take it that far, but
It's so sweet though. I mean, I think, people that are watching you like be vulnerable and just like own it. And I especially love, I mean, I've been in a relationship for 15 years and I'm married, but I think you're such a good role model for people who are navigating like wanting to be loved and wanting to love others, how you're just so clear cut. Like, love is not, questioning yourself or questioning if this person wants to be with you. You say things very straightforward and very boldly, and there's no like wiggle room, like, well, I'm confused or what if. It's just like you're telling it how it is, and I think it's so inspiring to people to like really take what you're saying and like cut through the bullshit of their own lives and maybe, stand up for themselves and not settle. So
well, I appreciate that. I mean that I think that's the way forward. I mean, I know everyone's personality is different, but for me it's like, why would I want to convince someone to want to be like, the absurdity of that just strikes me so poignantly. And I know it's not that easy, of course, but for me, but if you can distill it down to that level of simplicity, then it becomes very clear. So that's why I think a lot of my work around everything is about simplicity. Like I write these quotes, these are the simplest things in the world. We're not reinventing the wheel. I'm not Deepak Chopra. Like these are simple things, but I think we need simplicity. The brain is really good at retaining information. It's not that great at processing it concurrently. And so that's why I always say like journaling is intentional thinking. It's the art of freezing thoughts so we could actually process them and simplify them. If it's a survival mechanism. Our brain is very good at like, don't touch that because that's hot. Don't do this because it'll get you hurt. It's very good at holding that. I don't think it's great at processing it at the same time. So how do we step back, simplify so that we can process it, so that we can simplify it? Like that's the name of the game, because everything is always a but or what if then. Like I did this Q&A session in Dallas recently, and like someone, I don't even remember what the question was, but it was a very simple question, but every answer I would give would just be followed up with a but what. And I love that. Like let's have a dialogue about it, but like imagine in her head what that's like on a daily basis of just justifying or hypotheticals, and that's a tough place to be, certainly. Like overthinkers have it doubly as hard.
And just the energy, it's an energy suck. I mean, you actually could take some of that energy and actually apply it to, I don't know, living or actually doing something rather than living in your head.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I love the simplicity. I mean, we only have so much time a day, and like to work on ourselves or to be connected to ourselves and everything that's going on in the world. Like, yes, I love getting deep into certain books and things like that, but I mean, just the other day I was listening to your podcast and I was walking my dogs. I'm like, okay, I have 20 minutes. I'm going to take some me time. I'm going to walk the dogs and I'm going to listen to a podcast.
Love it.
And yours, it was the episode about connection versus like fitting in and like navigating friendships. And I'm in my mid 40s, and it was like, I think 20-minute episode, and you just clear cut in defining what fitting in is versus actual connection. And by the end of the dog walk, I was like, holy shit, like I'm actually like staying true to myself, and I'm like literally cleaning up my friendship box. And like, it was just simple and clear, and I got the point and I applied it to life. Like I think that's amazing. Is super powerful. So I think, I don't know, why do you think you're so relatable to people? I mean, you have a huge, and I don't like to say following, you have a huge community of people that I think wait for, you to show up, whether it's in your podcast or with your posts and your sharing. Like, why do you think you're so relatable?
I mean, I think it's because I say the things that people are also saying to themselves or want to say to themselves or want to believe, but just need to hear someone else say it. I think that's why I really don't put myself over here and other people there. Like the things I say are things that you and everyone else are also probably thinking, but maybe struggle to find the language behind it, or maybe struggle to put a period at it. They want to put a comma and then blah, blah, blah.
And then
I think it's literally just like the creative energy I put into making, I mean, I always say my mission is very clear. It's to help people feel seen and give them a reason to be hopeful. And I think everyone wants that in a sense. No one wants to feel alone. Everyone wants to feel seen in what they're going through. And of course, everyone wants to feel hope and be optimistic. And I think if I could do that, people relate to it. And I think you do it in the simplest way. We're in an interesting time now where everything's about optimizing and like biohacking. And that's great. I think it's tremendous. I've, close friends with some of those folks, but I think at the end of the day, some people just want the simplicity of telling themselves what they deserve and then creating a life around it and then coming back to me or one of my colleagues and being reminded of it so they don't forget it, and having a North Star. Because that was my frustration in my 20s and early 30s. I just didn't have a foundation of what I believed. Always just taking what other people believe. That's why I don't really read a lot of nonfiction. I really don't. I read my friend's books. So I'm reading Jillian's book, Diego Young Pueblo's book. I read Sahil Bloom's book to support them. I don't want to read a bunch of nonfiction and then just regurgitate it on my own in a different way. I'll read fiction, but and again, there's nothing wrong with reading nonfiction. Please, I have a book coming out. Please read nonfiction. But for me, it was my struggle was with emulating and copying and pasting other people's aspirations in. This is what a single guy looks like in Chicago in his 20s. Do this, or this is what success looks like. Like really, like Sahil's new book 5 Types of Wealth, talking about like what is true wealth. I was like, oh, there's multiple types of wealth. Like I think in my 20s, I would have like money. Gotta have money, maybe freedom, maybe that kind of vibe. So I think there's certainly great content and people and books out there that can be the catalyst, but the rest is up to us to decide what that looks like for us. Even I think it's the funniest thing. I've been doing a lot of posts recently about new other types of love languages or underrated ways to express love for people. And I'm a practical guy, so to draw people in, you use the phrase love language. Everyone loves love languages, and I'll say an underrated love language is having a pulse on what makes your partner anxious and doing your best to ease it for them. Nice. That people really like that. And I get these comments and they're like, well, that's actually the type 4 of love language. I was like, why do we have to box it in? And it was because of, I forget who came up with the 5 types. That's fantastic. But do we have to say that there's only 5 ways to love and be loved? Like, come on, people. Let's break free of these labels. I just thought they were like, well, actually, I was like, cool, but
I remember you posting that this week because I think I even shared it because I hate that whole love language thing. I hate to sound negative about it, but I actually will have this conversation with my friends. They'll be like, well, so-and-so, look what he bought me for my birthday. And it'll be like, oh, well, your love language is gifts. And I'm just like, that's not even love. I don't know. And I'm just like, why do we have to, I know it's the labeling and I don't know.
And again, back to the idea of labels, it unfairly sets expectations for yourself and future partners. If you decided when you're 22 that you prefer to receive gifts as a love language, just questionable again. Then anyone who doesn't lean into that suddenly is incompatible with you, which is just so unfair. And I think, and again, back to the top, I've been talking a lot about directness and clarity recently. I think there's something incredibly powerful about telling your partner what makes you feel loved. I really like it when you do this. This makes me feel loved. There's a lot of power in that. And I think a lot of people are averse to that because we've gotten to the stage where they should just know, or your soulmate will naturally give it to you. To have to voice it means it's not real. Internet advice. And I think it's unfair. And I just think we need to let go of some of these labels that are helpful, right? It's helpful to say, what makes me feel loved? What type of love person am I? That's a great question to ask yourself, but to say it has to be one of 5 and to have gifts as part of it, I think is funny. Especially in Miami. It's really funny. I mean, honestly, I can say that if you were to go back and look at my relationship in terms of love languages, I didn't fit any of the boxes. And in fact, my marriage is one of the ones that have survived at a lot of my friends. We met and we've been together since our first date. We dated for 5 years, and before we ever got engaged, we didn't even say we loved each other until after a year. Everyone would be like, oh, he's messing, it's just ripping me apart. And we've been together 15 years and we're more in love than ever, and we have 2 children. So it's don't label
you're doing yourself a disservice. If I would have lived with labels or, oh, does he look good on paper? I would not be in the marriage that I have today and the relationship.
Yeah. I have a book coming out later this year that's helping us reframe love. What is the purpose of it? Why do we want it? What does it mean for us? And the opening chapters is how like love is kind of inherently a bit of a selfish endeavor. Like it has to come from what you truly want, not the optics of what love should look like. It has to start there. It has to. And then ultimately love does become, almost, ideally 50-50, but never always 50-50. But it has to start from that place of what makes me feel loved versus what is maybe expected of me on a timeline, and all these different things. And one of the biggest things that I keep coming back to is the Gottman Institute. They talk a lot about, John Gottman talks about emotional bids for connection. Like what is the way that you connect with another person, and what is the way that you prefer to be connected with? Emotional bids for connection, I think, is such a better phrase than love language. Emotional bids for connection, like, is it, practically speaking, is it talking about your day? Is it asking about questions? One of the ones that I wrote a whole chapter on is like playfulness and weirdness together as an emotional bid for connection. Having those types of things, but having the absence of I love yous or living together is not problematic. And that's where I think we get in our head so much so. Even like with friends who they mean well and they're trying to help, but they get in our heads and they start saying things, and it just throws us so fundamentally. So that's why, again, mindset, our relationship with other people, our relationship with ourselves, knowing what makes us feel loved, and also having the humility, perhaps on the more male ego-driven side, of knowing that like just because you prefer to love someone in some way doesn't mean that they feel that loved that way. And that's a very difficult conversation to have, to go to someone who is actively loving you from their preferred emotional bid or love language and to say, hey, I really appreciate it when you do this, but it doesn't really make me feel loved. To have a conversation like that is very difficult because it makes you feel savage and asking for too much. But that's the kind of conversation that creates a real bond. Like, you talk about the typical Miami man on the stereotypical side.
God.
Me paying for your rent because I think that will really woo you is a nothing burger, hopefully on the other end. And your ability to say, hey, like, I really like you. I think you're acting. I mean, you have to obviously sandwich this good, bad, good in a conversation to say, I think you're acting out of maybe what your ex preferred or what you think that I want or whatever. That's a tough conversation to have, but to say like, I really like you as a person. Why don't we XYZ? Like, you don't have to pay my rent. Whatever absurd thing, Miami thing is going on. That type of conversation. I have so many examples
that are in my head right now, but I'm not going to say them.
I mean,
it's
it attracts a certain relationship dynamic down here, which is fine if you want that. But if you want something deeper, then I think conversations like that are so necessary. And again, maybe this is more on the female who date men's side. Something about, I talk to a lot of women and they're like, well, I shouldn't have to, say this thing. I shouldn't have to say that, like, I would prefer you to do this instead of that. And then because if he does it, then he's just doing what I say to do. And like, I understand that, but as a man, if my girlfriend was like, hey, Case, like, you don't have, like, that's very nice that you take out the trash every night and you clean the yard. That's great. But what really makes me feel loved is when we spend time together. I'm like, this is amazing. You just handed me the blueprint to make you feel loved, and I want you to feel loved. I've been trying by taking out the trash, but that's caveman. That's not enough. This is amazing. You just handed me the blueprint. Now I'm going to do it because I want to, not because you told me to. Now our relationship is even stronger, but we have to have a willingness to have a conversation. And for some people, having a conversation about what makes them feel loved is unromantic, whereas I think for the right person, it's the most romantic thing ever. I did a reel this past week that had a couple 100,000 views that I said that being direct is a filter for the wrong people and a magnet for the right people. And it's painful for the wrong people filtering process, but amazingly rewarding for the magnet process. But you never know unless you actually give it a whirl.
Wow, I can't wait to read your new book. By the way, congratulations on the, can I say, is 2-book deal?
It is a 2-book deal, yeah. So I've got one coming out in 2027. Mark your calendars.
I'm so excited. And will the second one, the first one is about relationships and love?
Correct. Second one is not.
Okay.
If anything, not that I want to get away from it. I want to take a pause from talking about relationships for a little bit, because I feel like a lot of the internet is talking about it, and I'd like to go in a different direction, something more soulful, philosophical for 2027. But yes, the first book it's not even about relationships. It's definitely not rules for love or how to find love. It's more about what is love, what's the point of love, what's the point of partnership. So it's kind of just a holistic, optimistic reframing of what's the point.
Oh my gosh!
Because I think we need it. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I can't wait for this one.
August.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here today. And the one last question I would just like to ask you, because you have so much going on, is there anything you're looking to bring more into your life? You've got the book deals, a great relationship, you are living your purpose and your passion, but is there any experience or connection or any aspect of your own self-growth that you're wanting to attract more of this year?
Yeah, so it's actually the topic of my second book.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
But not even to talk about the book, because that one's so personal to me, as far as what my goal is in life, which is to be, I won't say the name of the book, but it's to have a certain element of slowness to life. And not necessarily slowness in the literal sense of going slow, but slowness in the sense of presence and appreciation. We're all getting older, and I think it's becoming rather obvious the things that we've skipped through in life, as thinking of it as in between time. This is in between now and the day where it finally pays off. Arrival fallacy, classic. And I really want to appreciate the time I have now. We have a great apartment in Edgewater, 30 stories up, overlooking the Intercoastal. It's beautiful. And sometimes I'll just realize that I don't appreciate that. It's an insane view. Anyone on the internet would be like, wow, that's crazy. And I find so frequently I just don't appreciate it. And I really don't like that fact. It's what's the point of working hard or having a great relationship or any of these things that we're seeking if we don't have the depth of presence that we're all capable of? So it's somewhat easy answer of just, I want to be more present, have a greater depth to life, relationships, people. That's why I'm trying to do more events, in-person events with people, to get offline, to actually talk to people. I think to me that's the most rewarding part of the work, and it also accomplishes that goal of just being grounded. So even now, I'm I haven't checked my phone in however long we've been talking, 40 minutes, and that's such a problematic realization. So more presence, more grounded, more slowness in a sense, but more though. I think a lot of people have this mentality of well, in order to appreciate, you need to do less. I think it's you do more, but you find a way to be grounded in why you're doing it and the presence of the process of doing it, and not sinking into this arrival fallacy type mentality. So yes, that is what I'm after.
Oh, well, we are so excited for your new books coming out this year and 2027. I can't wait. I want to thank you so much for your time today and this conversation. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Surviving Roots. I hope it gave you something meaningful to carry with you. Let's keep this conversation going. Find me on Instagram at cari.fund, where I'll share more from the show. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone who needs it. And remember, we are the choices that we make.